The day Grandpa died, my brother Marco showed his true colors. Not with tears or grief, but with a smirk that made my blood boil. I'm Sela, and I grew up believing that hard work and dedication would earn me a place at the table. But standing in that mahogany-paneled office, watching our family lawyer shuffle through the papers of Grandpa's will, I realized how naive I'd been. As per Mr. Salazar's final wishes, Yvette adjusted her glasses, her voice steady and professional. The entirety of the family business and associated assets will pass to Marco. The air left my lungs. 10 years of working alongside Grandpa, learning every aspect of the business, staying late at the office while Marco played golf with his friends. All of it meant nothing. That can't be right, I said, stepping forward. Grandpa always said the business would go to whoever proved most capable. Marco's chair scraped against the hardwood floor as he stood, straightening his designer tie. Come on, sis. You know how these things work. It's a man's world. Mom touched my arm. Sela, dear, your grandfather knew what he was doing. Marco will take good care of everything. Everything I helped build, I muttered, pulling away from her touch. Actually, Yvette interjected, there are some smaller provisions. Sela, you'll receive your grandfather's collection of first edition books and... Books? I laughed, but it came out more like a sob. While Marco gets the entire company? I'll make sure you get a nice office, Marco said, his condescending tone making my skin crawl. Maybe an HR? That seems more... suitable. Teresa, my best friend who'd come for moral support, grabbed my hand. Breathe, Sela, she whispered, but I couldn't breathe. Not with Marco strutting around like a peacock. Not with Mom beaming at him like he'd just won a Nobel Prize. And certainly not with the memory of Grandpa telling me just last month how proud he was of my dedication to the company. There must be more, I said to Yvette. Show me the will. I'm afraid that's not possible right now, she replied, closing her briefcase with a decisive click. Legal procedures must be followed. Marco draped his arm around my shoulders. Don't worry, little sister. I'll make sure you're taken care of. I shrugged him off, meeting his eyes. You know what, Marco? Grandpa taught me something valuable. Nothing in business is ever as simple as it seems on the surface. His smile faltered for just a moment, enough to tell me I'd struck a nerve. As everyone filed out of the office, I stayed behind, watching the sunset through the window of what should have been my future. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. There's always a catch with legal documents, Jonathan said, adjusting his reading glasses as he studied the copy of Grandpa's will I'd managed to obtain. Your grandfather was too smart to leave things this... simple. I'd known Jonathan since law school, where he'd been my favorite professor. Now, sitting in his modest office surrounded by towering bookshelves, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. Look at this, he said, pointing to a dense paragraph. There's a clause here about responsible management. If the primary heir fails to maintain the company's ethical standards or mismanages the fortune... He trailed off, eyes widening. What? I leaned forward. What does it say? The board can vote to redistribute the inheritance if there's proof of misconduct. He looked up at me. Sela, did your brother ever show any questionable business practices? I thought back to last year's audit. He's always been secretive about certain accounts. And there's this new partner of his, Calvin. They're constantly having closed-door meetings. That's not enough, Jonathan warned. You'd need concrete evidence. My phone buzzed. A text from Teresa. Marco just announced major changes to the board. Roberto's furious. Something's happening at the company, I said, showing Jonathan the message. Marco's already making moves. He handed me back the will. Be careful, Sela. Corporate investigations can get ugly, especially with family involved. I worked there for 10 years, I replied, standing up. I know where to look. Wait. Jonathan opened his desk drawer and pulled out a business card. My friend at the SEC. If you find anything serious, call her immediately. Outside his office, I called Teresa. I need your help. Remember how you used to work in corporate accounting? Already thinking about infiltrating your brother's empire? She laughed. I'm in. But first, you need to know something. I overheard Calvin at the country club yesterday bragging about some offshore account. My heart raced. Can you get closer to him? Maybe pretend you're interested in investing? Oh, honey, I already got his number. He's not exactly subtle with the ladies. Perfect. I smiled, already forming a plan. Meet me for coffee tomorrow. We need to. A familiar voice behind me made me freeze. Scylla? What are you doing here? I turned to find Roberto, the board member who'd always been Marco's biggest supporter, looking at me suspiciously. Roberto, I was just consulting about Grandpa's will. His eyes narrowed. Your brother mentioned you might cause trouble. Don't do anything foolish, girl. Some stones are better left unturned. As he walked away, I gripped Jonathan's business card tighter. Roberto's warning only confirmed what I'd suspected. There was definitely something to find. And I was going to find it. You always were the clever one, Mom said quietly, pouring more wine into her glass. We were sitting in her kitchen after our weekly family dinner while Marco held court with the others in the living room. What do you mean? I asked, surprised by her tone. She glanced toward the living room, then lowered her voice. Your grandfather used to say you reminded him of himself at your age, always watching, always calculating. Before I could respond, Yvette walked in, heading for the coffee maker. I seized my chance. Yvette, I've been meaning to ask you about some old company documents. I'm not at liberty to discuss, she began. Just the public records, I interrupted smoothly. The ones from before Marco took over. Mom stood up suddenly. Salah, leave it alone, please. Listen to your mother, Yvette said, but her eyes darted away too quickly. She knew something. From the living room, Marco's laughter boomed. And then I told Calvin, who cares about the environmental impact study? We'll just backdate the paperwork. Roberto's nervous chuckle followed. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. I pulled out my phone and hit record, but Mom grabbed my wrist. Stop this, she hissed. You'll tear this family apart. Marco's already doing that, I whispered back. You heard what he just said. That's illegal. Your brother is adjusting to his new role. Adjusting? I stood up, my chair scraping loudly. He's destroying everything Grandpa built. The living room went quiet. Marco appeared in the doorway, his face flushed from drinking. Having a nice chat about me? Actually, I smiled sweetly. I was just telling Mom about my lunch with Calvin yesterday. Marco's face paled. What? Oh, didn't he mention it? We had the most interesting conversation about offshore accounts. I was bluffing. Teresa hadn't met with Calvin yet, but Marco's reaction told me everything I needed to know. You're lying, he sputtered. Calvin would never. Marco, Roberto called from the living room. We should go, that meeting tomorrow. As they hurried out, Yvette caught my eye and gave me the slightest nod. She'd seen it too. Marco's panic, his guilty reaction. Mom gripped my arm. Whatever you're doing, stop. You don't understand what's at stake. I understand perfectly, I replied, pulling away. Grandpa spent his life building something honest. I won't let Marco destroy that. Then you leave me no choice. Mom said, her voice breaking. I know about the evidence you're gathering. If you don't back off, I'll have to tell Marco everything. I stared at her, betrayal burning in my chest. You've known about his illegal activities all along, haven't you? Her silence was all the answer I needed. Got him, Teresa whispered into her phone earpiece, pretending to check her makeup in the restaurant's bathroom mirror. Calvin just showed me everything. I gripped my steering wheel tighter, parked across the street from the upscale restaurant where Teresa was having lunch with Calvin. What did you find? Multiple offshore accounts, fake environmental reports. And get this, he's been doctoring board meeting minutes. Your brother's signature is on everything. Can you get proof? Already did. Calvin's not just unethical, he's stupid. Left his laptop open when he went to take a call. I got photos. My heart raced. Get out of there, now. Wait. Teresa's voice dropped lower. Marco just walked in. He looks furious. Through the restaurant's window, I saw Marco storming toward Calvin's table. Even from here, I could see his face was red with anger. I can hear them, Teresa whispered. Marco's saying something about... Oh, God. What? He's threatening Calvin. Says if he breathes a word about the accounts to anyone, he'll make sure Calvin takes the fall for everything. I started recording on my phone, just as Marco's voice carried across the nearly empty restaurant, loud enough to hear from the bathroom. I don't care what you told her. Fix this or I'll destroy you. Get out of there, I urged Teresa. Now. She hung up. I watched her emerge from the bathroom, walk calmly past Marco and Calvin, and head for the exit. But Calvin suddenly looked up, recognition flooding his face. Hey, he called out. Aren't you Sella's friend? Marco whirled around. Teresa kept walking, but Marco was faster, cutting her off before she reached the door. I was out of my car in seconds, rushing across the street. Through the window, I could see Marco gripping Teresa's arm, his face twisted with rage. Let her go. I burst through the door. Well, Marco sneered, releasing Teresa. Should have known you were behind this. Still can't accept that you lost, can you? Lost? I pulled out my phone, showing him the recording app. I just won, Marco. The whole restaurant heard you threatening Calvin. You recorded nothing, he said, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Check your email, Teresa said coolly, rubbing her arm. I just sent myself quite a few interesting documents from Calvin's laptop, copying Sella and Jonathan, of course. Calvin jumped up. You what? You're done, Marco, I said. Both of you. Marco stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You have no idea what you're doing, Sella. Back off now, or I promise you'll regret it. The only thing I regret, I replied, is not stopping you sooner. As we left, I heard Calvin's panicked voice. What are we going to do? Marco's response chilled me. Whatever it takes. These documents are dynamite, Jonathan said, spreading the files across his desk. Environmental violations, falsified board minutes, offshore accounts. Marco's going to prison for this. If we can prove they're real, I replied, rubbing my temples. He's already claiming they're fabricated. My phone buzzed with another message from Mom. Please stop this madness. Come home. We can talk. Your mother's still trying to protect him? Jonathan asked, noticing my expression. She thinks she's protecting the family. I switched my phone off. What's our next move? The door burst open. Roberto stormed in, waving a stack of papers. You went too far, Sela. Way too far. How did you find me here? I stood up. Your mother told me. He slammed the papers down. Look at these. Marco showed me everything. Fake documents, doctored photos, all traced back to your computer. Jonathan picked up the papers, examining them carefully. These are good forgeries. Almost perfect. They're not forgeries, Roberto snapped. They prove Sela's trying to frame Marco. Really? I pulled out my laptop. Then explain this email from Calvin to Marco, discussing how to backdate the environmental reports. Roberto's face reddened. That's confidential company information. You had no right. I had every right, I shot back. Grandpa built that company on honesty and integrity. Marco's destroying everything he stood for. Your grandfather. Roberto faltered. He wouldn't want this family conflict. No, a voice said from the doorway. But he'd want the truth. We all turned. Yvette stood there, holding a thick manila envelope. What are you doing here? Roberto demanded. Fulfilling my duty as executor, she replied, walking to Jonathan's desk. These are the original documents from the environmental studies, the ones before Marco altered them. My heart leaped. You kept copies? Your grandfather insisted. He said... She glanced at me. He said his granddaughter might need them someday. Roberto sank into a chair. He knew? About Marco? He suspected, Yvette said quietly. That's why the will had that clause about misconduct. My phone suddenly came to life with messages. Teresa's name flashed on the screen. Turn on the news now. Jonathan grabbed his remote, switching on the office TV. There was Marco being led out of the company building in handcuffs. Calvin was already in the back of a police car. The SEC? I asked Jonathan. He nodded. I called them this morning. Those offshore accounts were too big to ignore. Roberto stood up slowly, his face ashen. I need to call an emergency board meeting. As he left, Yvette touched my arm. Your mother's going to need you now. More than ever. I watched Marco's face on the TV screen, seeing not triumph but tragedy. I know, but first we need to save the company. The boardroom fell silent as I laid out the last piece of evidence. 12 pairs of eyes stared at the projection screen, where Marco's signature gleamed on damning document after damning document. As you can see, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. The pattern of fraud goes back 18 months. Roberto cleared his throat. These allegations are serious, but Marco claims nothing, Teresa interrupted, walking in with the USB drive. The SEC just sent over his signed confession. Mom burst into tears. I started to reach for her, but she turned away. Mrs. Salazar, Roberto said gently, perhaps you should step out. No. Mom straightened her shoulders. I need to hear everything. I need to understand what my son did. The boardroom doors suddenly flew open. Calvin strode in, looking desperate. Stop. Everything she's saying is a lie. Calvin, Jonathan warned, standing up. You're violating the terms of your bail. The offshore accounts were her idea. Calvin pointed at me, his hand shaking. She set the whole thing up to frame Marco. I have proof. I stayed calm. Show us. He pulled out a folder, spreading documents across the table. Look, here's Salah's signature authorizing the transfers. Roberto picked up one of the papers, studying it. This signature. It's dated last Tuesday. Exactly, Calvin said triumphantly. Last Tuesday, Teresa said slowly. When Sela was in the hospital having her appendix removed, I believe 6 people in this room visited her there. Calvin's face went white. Did Marco put you up to this? I asked quietly. One last desperate attempt to save himself? I just... Calvin backed away. He said he'd take care of me if I did this one thing. 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. Roberto nodded to them. Please escort Mr. Rose out and call his bail bondsman. As Calvin was led away, Mom stood up. I need to say something. The room went still. I knew, she said, her voice breaking. I knew Marco was doing something wrong, but I convinced myself it was just business, that all successful men bend the rules. She turned to me. I was so wrong, Sela. Your grandfather would be ashamed of me. Mom, but he would be proud of you. She wiped her eyes. You fought for what's right, even when I tried to stop you. Roberto cleared his throat. We need to vote on new leadership, given the circumstances and the terms of the will. Wait, I said. Before we vote, everyone needs to understand. This isn't about revenge anymore. This is about restoring what Grandpa built. Are you ready for that? One by one, the board members nodded. It was time to rebuild. The vote is unanimous, Roberto announced, his voice echoing in the packed conference room. Sela will assume immediate control as CEO, effective immediately. Before I could respond, the doors burst open. Marco, flanked by 2 lawyers, stormed in. This is illegal, he shouted. You can't do this. It's already done, Jonathan said, standing. The SEC has frozen your assets pending investigation. The board has voted. Marco laughed bitterly. You think you've won, don't you, sis? You think you can just walk in here and take everything I built? Everything you destroyed, you mean? Teresa corrected from her seat. The environmental violations alone, Roberto added, have cost us 3 major contracts. Those tree huggers would have killed our profit margins. Marco spat. I stood up slowly. That's exactly why you failed, Marco. You never understood what Grandpa built here. It wasn't about cutting corners for quick profits. Oh, spare me the moral high ground. He pulled out his phone. You want to talk about morals? Let's talk about how you've been secretly meeting with our competitors. The room tensed. Marco played a recording. My voice discussing company details. But something was off. That meeting, I said calmly, was with the Environmental Protection Agency. 3 weeks ago. Teresa was there, along with Jonathan and 2 board members. She's right, Roberto confirmed. We were all present trying to address the damage you'd done. Marco's lawyer whispered something in his ear. He shrugged the man off. You've turned everyone against me, he hissed. My own mother won't even look at me. You did that yourself, Mom said quietly. Every time you chose greed over integrity. The police are here, Yvette announced from the doorway. Marco's face crumpled. For a moment, I saw the brother I used to know, the one who taught me to ride a bike, who defended me from bullies in school. Marco, I said softly, turn yourself in. Take responsibility. It's what Grandpa would have wanted. Grandpa? He laughed harshly. Grandpa always liked you better. Even when he gave me everything, it was a test, one he knew I'd fail. 2 officers entered the room. Marco straightened his tie, composing himself. Congratulations, Sella. You won. He held out his wrists for the handcuffs. But ask yourself, was it worth it? Breaking up the family? Sending your own brother to prison? As they led him away, Teresa squeezed my hand. You did the right thing. Did I? I watched through the window as Marco was escorted to a waiting police car. Then why doesn't it feel like victory? Roberto cleared his throat. The press is waiting downstairs. They'll want a statement from the new CEO. I nodded, gathering my strength. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about making things right. He asked about you, Mom said, stirring her coffee in Grandpa's old office, my office now. During visitation, I looked up from the stack of environmental compliance reports. What did Marco say? He wanted to know if you kept his old photos on the wall. She gestured to where Marco's corporate achievements had once hung, now replaced by Grandpa's original business plan and mission statement. I kept one, I said, opening my desk drawer. The photo showed Marco and me as kids, grinning on Grandpa's shoulders. The intercom buzzed. Ms. Sella, the EPA representatives are here for the presentation. Send them in. I stood up, straightening my jacket. You sound just like him, Mom smiled. Your grandfather, I mean. He always said send them in exactly like that. Teresa entered with 3 EPA officials. Ready to show them the new cleanup initiative? Actually, I said, I thought we'd start in the factory. Show them exactly how we're implementing the changes. Roberto appeared in the doorway. The workers are ready. They're excited to demonstrate the new recycling system. As we walked to the elevator, one of the EPA officials checked his notes. Your brother's sentencing is tomorrow, isn't it? Yes, I replied simply. It must be difficult, he said, balancing family loyalty with corporate responsibility. The elevator opened to the factory floor where dozens of workers waited. Many had been here since Grandpa's time. They smiled and nodded as we passed. Family loyalty, I said, raising my voice over the machinery, means protecting what matters most. Sometimes that means protecting the family from itself. Sella, a worker called out, waving us over. We've reduced waste by 60% already. As the EPA officials gathered around for the demonstration, Teresa touched my arm. You okay? Look at this place, I said. Clean energy, fair wages, environmental protection. Everything Grandpa believed in. Everything Marco almost destroyed. Speaking of which, Teresa nodded toward the entrance where Yvette stood holding a folder. The last of the restitution payments cleared, Yvette said when we reached her. All the environmental damage costs are covered. And the workers' pension fund? Fully restored, with interest. Mom joined us, her eyes bright. Your grandfather would be so proud. Of the company? I asked. Of you, she said. For fighting for what's right, not what's easy. The factory hummed around us, clean and efficient, filled with proud workers and honest work. Through the windows, I could see the solar panels we'd installed, and beyond them, the trees Grandpa had planted decades ago. You know what, Mom? I smiled, watching the EPA officials nodding approvingly at the recycling demonstration. I think he'd be proud of all of us. We finally learned what he tried to teach us all along. What's that? That true success isn't about power or money. It's about leaving things better than you found them.